Hey, welcome back to Beats Learning, the podcast where we pull back the curtain on the music industry and chat with the people making things happen behind the scenes. I'm your host, Ben Davenport. Today's guests are a powerhouse duo in musical theatre. They're the creative minds behind shows like The Rhythmics, The Bachelor Girls, Michael Morpurgo's Mimi and the Mountain Dragon, and more. Between them, they write, compose, orchestrate and arrange, and they've carved out a space for bold, original storytelling on stage. Today we get into their process, how they collaborate, what it's really like writing for theatre today, and what makes a musical connect with an audience. But before we dive in, if you're enjoying the show, hit like, subscribe and share it with someone who's into theatre, songwriting, or just loves hearing how creative work actually gets made. Now that's done, it's a pleasure to introduce Caroline Wigmore and Jennifer Green. So Caroline and Jennifer, welcome to Beats Learning, my first dynamic duo.
Oh wow! Are we the first duo you've had?
Yes. I actually had to buy a special mic just to Berry, so there we go. That's why it's attached down there and not all pretty on here. But thank you so much for the pair of you coming on today. So there's a lot that we've got to cover today. You've both got your own individual incredible careers, but seeing as it's the two of you today, I really wanted to start with how you met and what made you want to decide to make musicals together.
Good question. Do you want to start, Caroline?
Yes, well, Jen and I met at Goldsmiths College. We were doing our master's in musical theatre writing. We were studying under Julian Wolford at the time, and we both were on the course as composers, so that makes us a little bit unique. But we both have kind of opposite skill sets when it comes to music, I'd say. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth mentioning, just in case any of your listeners haven't realised, that Caroline is not from the UK originally.
I am a dual citizen now.
My first American on the show too. There we go.
I'm both.
You're going gold for it everywhere these days.
And actually, strangely, I wasn't born in the UK either, so I didn't really live in the UK till I was at university here. But that's kind of by the by. But we both met at Goldsmiths. Interestingly, we have really similar backgrounds and very different backgrounds at the same time. So we're almost the same age. Like there's 2 months between us in terms of age. Yeah, but we'd also both done some other things between our undergrad degrees and going to Goldsmiths. And then decided that, no, this was something that we'd really wanted to do and had saved up to do it and to be able to facilitate that. And so I think we came at it with the same aims and also very similar experiences. But as Caroline said, we're from completely different backgrounds musically.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, you went to University of Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken.
I did.
You were at the University of Oxford.
Yeah. Yep.
So, as I say, different countries, different backgrounds, different goals. So what made it, what was the click moment? What made you think, well, actually, this is the person I want to write musicals with?
Oh,
that's a good question.
I don't think there's an exact answer for that, but I can speak for myself in that for me, I'm more of a kind of folk rock gospel background. Yep. And for me, I'm very melody driven.
Okay.
And Jen,
there's that composer coming out of you.
And Jen is Oxford trained.
Yeah. So I've got a misspent youth playing in string quartets. A background. I play the viola. I play the piano. I've done a lot of orchestral music as well. But just because of my education and I'm very classically orientated. I'm very focused on harmony and texture and things and. It works together really well. Yeah, so we kind of... As a combination.
We come together and we can sort of fill the voids for each other somehow.
Yeah, and it's not like Caroline doesn't know what to do with musical texture. Yeah, that's not it. But it's just that the skills are very complementary.
Of course. Yeah.
But I think it's also important that we both like the same kinds of work and music, and we have we always used to play this game at some of our shows with BYMT, which we can talk about later, where we all brought some music from our youth and things that we'd grown up listening to, and we always had similar music, kind of massive variety of things.
Amazing.
Coming up there.
Yeah.
So do you have, and obviously I don't want to get too involved in your sort of your the way that you put together your musicals and anything yet, but do you have your roles and responsibilities, or is it just a mixed bag depending on what you're doing at the time? How does it work to sort of kind of set out who does what?
I think that our roles are more defined on the business side, because when you're in the arts, there's always going to be a business side to what you're doing. Even though maybe we should have more training for that when we're actually studying.
Well, the aspiration is always not to to do so much business, but it's important.
Of course,
you have to.
It's very entrepreneurial. And when we get into that, Jen is entirely responsible for spreadsheets.
I love a spreadsheet.
Me too, Jen. Yeah. We can chat about 4 minutes later. I've got you.
And anything sort of art marketing, that's my department. So
yeah. Pictures, numbers in terms of that. In terms of actual creative writing, it far more depends on what we're working on. It's very organic as well. We usually at the beginning of a project will spend a long time together, just chewing through ideas and working things through. It's hard to describe, isn't it? But I suppose like getting a big block of rock and sort of chiseling away at it until you've got the basic shape of what it is. And if we want to take that metaphor further, then we'll always do that bit together, because you have to know what you're trying to create, how high it is and how fat it is and what colour it is.
And you have to agree on what it is.
And you have to agree on what it is, otherwise you're pulling in very odd directions and it's going to break.
So you first did collaborate. Sorry, I don't know if I've jumped in there.
Oh, no, that's okay.
What was your first collaboration then?
Well, technically, it was Van Winkle.
It was Van Winkle, a folk musical, was Caroline started writing that at Goldsmiths. And then after Goldsmiths, we started working on it together. So that was... I suppose that was our way into it as well. And that was something that Caroline had initiated and written the songs for. And then I came on board initially as an arranger and orchestrator. And then it just kind of mushed and merged from there.
And then we started working on all aspects of book lyrics. Let me say it again. And then we started working on all aspects of book, music, and lyrics together from that point.
And I don't want to get too much into this quite yet, but how does it differ working with someone than working on your own? Because, as I say, you've both got incredibly established independent careers. And let's be honest, if I just pick up the iPad for 2 seconds, I can see all the stuff you girls have done sort of separately then together. How does it compare sort of kind of doing it on your own to having someone to work with?
Well, Jen, one time you said it's like having a conversation with yourself. So
I'm glad you remember that.
Yeah, I remember that because I thought that was a good one, because sometimes you have a thought about something you've created, but it's so deep in your subconscious and you're not sure it's true. So you need to hand it off to your writing partner, and then they can just pinpoint it right away, and you go, "That's what I was trying to think."
Yeah, I mean, it's a truism, but it's like a work marriage.
Yeah, of course.
And also, I suppose we're relatively unusual in that we're monogamous in our work marriage. So we only write musical theatre together. We do other things separately and individually, but we always write together, and we've been doing it for, I don't even want to think about how long now. It's getting on for 12 years, right?
I think it's more than that.
It's more than that. Yeah. Okay, that's scary. But it means that it is like a marriage, and everybody has their things that they bring, and we look at things from slightly different angles, and that's actually turned into a really important part of our writing process as well, because if I'm working on something and struggling with it, as Caroline said, I can just take it there going, look, this isn't working. I know that it's not working. Have a look at it. Why is it not working? This is what I think. And Caroline will look at it and go, oh yeah, that's going on. Yeah. Let's tweak that.
Fresh ears type scenario.
Yeah, right? But with someone, it's different because obviously we love getting feedback from other people as well, and we really value a lot of our directors and dramaturg relationships too. But it's different to that because it's something that you can do really early on in the stage where you're not quite. A lot of it's when you're not quite sure what a thing is yet. And that's the time when you really want to. You have to nurture it and grow it, and you can't throw anything at it too hard. And being able to do that together has really. I think we've developed a really nice structure for managing that.
Did you tend to find one that's more creative and coming with the ideas, or is it sort of very joint in that sense?
No. It's it could go either way, and often
That's good.
Yeah, we just sort of see how it's going and how we're feeling. As I say, we'll often just sit down and structure something together, do all the initial work together, and then often we'll take things away and work on them individually and then bring them back. Yeah, exactly.
But we are on Zoom a lot.
With your cats.
With our cats, yes. There are lots of cats in our lives.
I remember our introductory call that we had, and you did everything you say
no,
was
my
being
totally
echoed by a
useless
cat.
cats.
What a beautiful boy. Oh, beautiful cat.
They're two very beautiful boys. They're total pests.
So, one of the things I have noticed about the work that you do together, and it's very much focused on sort of kind of the young family, the family and young audience. Is there a reason behind that? Why is it that you decided to go down that route?
Good question. Do you want to go for that?
I mean, the short answer, I suppose, is that we actually write for adult audiences as well, but we think that the ground is quite fertile in the UK for family work.
Absolutely,
We think there's it's a good place to work in family, and we really enjoy it.
Yeah, the UK has an absolutely brilliant family theatre tradition, so it really feels like we can come and stand on the shoulders of giants, of everybody, all the amazing people who've done it before. You know, we grew up in the David Wood era. I mean, he sort of set the standard, I would say, internationally, for what children's theatre can do and the imagination that you can use with that. So it's actually, the UK is a really exciting place to work for family theatre. We both have children as well. So it's, to be quite frank, quite nice to create something that you can bring your kids to.
Do you ever get your kids involved with the idea in any way, whether it's ideas or sort of kind of, I don't know, I just shoot from the hip a little bit, but do you get them involved at all?
In small ways.
Very small ways.
They're not getting writers' credits.
No, they're not. No. But we do ask their opinions, actually, about things.
Yeah, because it's useful just to have a little mini test audience, but all children are different. They're like adults. They all have different opinions.
But the great thing is they have no filter, so if you ask them a question about what they think about something, they will tell you.
It's a good thing, though, right? Yes. Whether it's constructive criticism or just blank criticism, who knows? But, so how do you find then, because obviously, and certainly this is maybe me being naive, so apologies, but with kids, you've always got, children, shall I say, you've always got to find that sort of kind of middle ground or that compromise between it being both a bit of fun, educational, sort of actually have a bit of a story and a moral behind it. Well, how do you sort of kind of balance them things when writing your scripts?
I think we approach our family work in the exact same way that we approach adult work. So we often work from, we are often adapting books, novels.
Of course.
And we come at it with the same seriousness that we would an adult's show.
Yeah, I would argue possibly even more so. Writing for family audiences, I think, is harder than writing for adult audiences.
Absolutely, that's kind of the point.
Yeah, one of the advantages is that because the shows are a little bit shorter, it can be quicker as well, which is possibly why we've actually put out a lot more family work than we have work for adult audiences. Because if you've got a 50-minute family show that you could develop in, I'm going to say, maybe three years.
Wow, is that how long it takes to write a musical?
Well, that's a short musical.
Wow. That's a 50-minute one.
Crazy.
Yep. So if you want to write a full 2-act show, then 5-year minimum.
5 minimum, yeah.
Wow.
Which is, again, probably one of the reasons that we have several family shows out already, just because they're a little bit quicker.
It's also getting paid as well, right?
It's a very nice thing to do.
Exactly. Not to be sort of kind of cruel about it, but if you're going to work sort of kind of, even on, as you say, a 50-minute musical, it's still taking you 3 years just to write. Then I assume, obviously, you've got all the casting, the building of the sets, everything behind it. And obviously, we definitely want to get into that in a minute. I'd love to hear your sort of creative process. But it must be, what would you say the sort of kind of time from, let's say, right, you've had an idea, this is the book you want to do, to the point of your first stage show going live? How long would that normally be?
Oh, we could do that for real life with Errol's Garden, couldn't we?
It was slightly different with Errol's Garden because of the pandemic.
Of course.
But let's pretend there was no pandemic.
Yeah.
I remember
nice.
I think the journey of Errol's Garden adaptation started in a coffee shop with our director, Kate Gulich, where we came in with a stack of children's books that we were interested in possibly adapting. And so we would hold one up and we'd
we'd all look through it. We all
we'd
vote
vote
in our piles.
Yes, no, moving on.
Yeah.
Yes, no. Because so much of it really is a gut instinct. If we have a gut instinct about it, so will the audience. And
and then there are things that you look for in a book. Obviously, like you need a really strong character. There has to be a reason for the characters to sing. There has to be an arc that you can go on. If you're adapting a book, I think for us there has to be something that you can bring to it in a stage adaptation that isn't there in the book, because we very much come at our work from the adaptation angle, so we don't take the book and just translate it onto the stage. That is not a recipe for happy pacing. So there has to be something that you can bring to it creatively. So there has to be that space.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry I interrupted.
I think we got sidetracked. So I think it was in 2019.
I'm going to say, I think it was 2018.
2018. We were sitting in a coffee shop, and then it went on stage in
2021.
2021.
Yeah. And we were due to put it up spring of 2020, actually.
Okay.
That would have been the first production. So early 2018.
Yeah.
So
that's
that's better.
Probably one of the quicker ones.
Yeah, but even after the first year, you do a big rewrite.
Yeah.
And then,
really?
Yep. And then the show will be slightly different animal the next year.
That's something you don't hear of, really. Is that
sorry. Until it's probably published, you're going to you're never done.
Because there are always things, because each audience reacts to the show differently. And you sit there and you watch the audience reacting and you take away things from that. And you just want to, just not change it inherently, but just fine tune it. And
of course.
Keep giving it a little massage.
Yeah. And especially with kids, you really need to make sure they're engaged. So we're quite harsh with our rewrites, with ourselves. If something's not working, it's gone.
Yeah, and then you can feel it. Like you sit, and it's something you can only really feel with a group of kids.
Yep.
And sitting in the middle of the audience, and you can sense the
of
energy
course.
and where it's going. There are some proxies that you can use for it. So actually, on all our family work, if we're not there in the show reports, we always ask for things like reports on how many kids have gone to the toilet. Because that's actually a really good sign. There's always going to be a couple who genuinely just had a bottle of water.
But if 50 of them go to the toilet,
that says
something's wrong. They're bored.
Yeah.
So
that's really cool, because you hear a lot of data in the music scene, and obviously, I've spoken to a lot of the other guests who have been really focused on whether it be sort of more the A&R or whether it's sort of kind of what demographic works for them and things like that. But things like that's really crazy.
Here we are talking about children's bladders.
Toilet trips. They actually say the actual indirect message of that is: are they engaged? Are they thinking? Are they getting restless? Are they needing to go to the toilet?
Have half of them asked for a snack because that's how they do it if they're not engaged. And children, even a 3-year-old, will be able to sit there with absolutely crystal concentration
minutes,
for 50 minutes if they're engaged. And it's sort of experience, but also just trial and error. And you have to try things and change things and tweak things. That's a really important part of the process.
Yeah. I suppose a lot of your experience comes into play and helps maybe guide you, especially now, right? But do you ever work with sort of kind of smaller groups of kids or workshops, whether it's, I don't know, just a load of your friends' kids, or whether it's a school or anything, to test it before you put it out live?
We've tested sections of things.
Yeah,
on young audiences.
It's not something we do as a regular matter of course, mainly because if you get your friends' kids around, it's slightly different.
Yeah.
And I think it's also really important to have kids that you don't know who don't know you. So, you know, like with anything in life, there's no point knowing that it really works for my daughter and her 5 very similar friends. That's not it.
It's not exactly going to expand your fan base, is it?
No.
Or we might then get in and, you know, they'll have some kind of in-joke that they really get, or they'll really get one area, and then other kids won't react in the same way. So you almost want the totally random variety.
Absolutely. It's the diversity as well, right? You want to make sure that everyone that comes is going to at least be engaged somewhat. So, and I appreciate you mentioned a second ago, I don't want to bounce about too much, but you mentioned a second ago that when you're picking a musical to make, you're going through a selection of children's books, and whether it's a case of yes or no, that gut instinct. Once you've decided, how would you then start? How do you then sort of kind of start building out your concepts of actually putting this together?
First thing you have to do is make sure that you have the rights to adapt it. So let's do the real practicalities first. There's absolutely no point writing an amazing adaptation if you don't have the rights to put it on stage.
If you don't mind me jumping in just very quickly on that, and I'll absolutely let you finish. I'm really, really curious about this. Are there any that have kind of, you've had a massive brick wall sort of stop you because you couldn't get the rights, which you would have loved to have done?
Sure.
Of course.
But you can only sort of
good try though.
You can just ask. You can ask if the rights are available. Sometimes they aren't. Sometimes someone already has them.
Or sometimes they're tied up in something, or sometimes they have aspirations for a show that's just different. To how we do it. And, you know, when you apply for the rights, you always go in and say, look, this is what we'd be looking at doing with it. You know, this is the kind of scale of the show that we envisage it being. And then it's very much the author's decision as to whether they...
And the author might send through notes, yes, I like this aspect. I don't like the region that you've set this in for this reason or that reason. So we'll take those things into consideration and work with the authors.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'll come back.
That's okay.
We'll come back. So that was a really interesting question because obviously you with my background, which is sort of electronic music, and the vast majority of the guests so far have sort of kind of been in that arena. You know, rights are a massive one. You know, whether you're using a sample or whether you're just sort of kind of actually remaking the whole, doing a full cover, and the difference between what you can do and what authority the actual original artist has over it is actually changes crazy. Do you get that with yourself? Obviously, if you're doing an interpretation as opposed to a direct cover, is that where the original writer has more authority over you?
That depends entirely on the contract and how it's set up. But I think from a very practical point of view, we'd never want to go into something like that where we felt that the author wasn't clear how we would be adapting it. And, you know, you want the author of the work that you're adapting to be absolutely delighted with it and to sit there and go, oh, yes, I see what you've done. It's entirely different to the book, but it's true to the characters and the stories, and it's a different way of expressing it. And that's the best feeling when they do that.
I bet, especially when, you know, it's your hard work, it's your soul, your passion going into this, and you think, right, okay, I want to do the author proud. And when you get that sort of validation, that must go a long, long way. So sorry, I completely interrupted.
That's okay.
So you've got the rights.
We've got the rights.
Step one.
Where would you go from there?
I think we would start brainstorming. Often, though, even in the early stage when we, for instance, look at a pile of books, we can instantly go, oh, I can see it and I can hear it. So I can see what we would do and I can hear what we do with it. So if either of those things aren't present, then that's a good sign that maybe it's not a good choice for a musical adaptation. So when you have that gut, then you kind of go into it a little with just a kernel of an idea. So then you explore that kernel and then it blows up and up and up.
Yeah, so from a musical example, it would be, like we'd come in sometimes with an actual scrapbook of music ideas. So, for example, with Pigs Might Fly, we came in and we sort of wanted it to sound a little bit like a cross between the Wurzels and a brass band remix, but within the filter of family theatre. So we literally pulled together a musical scrapbook of ideas and thoughts and sound worlds. And then it's not like you go in and you copy a song, but it's just everything feeds in. I think it's probably like a designer's scrapbook. Just colour ideas and thoughts, and it's sort of like that for all aspects as well. And who's the main character? That's a really important one. Like whose story is it? Who else is there? Which characters need to stay? Often in books you find there are more characters than you want on stage because you can engage with more characters in a book than you can on a stage. So actually I would say that we have a fairly regular habit of killing off animals during the early stages.
Let's clarify, we're talking about characters in the story, not real animals.
No animals were harmed in the making of
you just have to kind of refine the story down to the very basics, and sometimes you have a lot of extraneous characters that pull away the focus. So,
and sometimes they get merged, or their functions will end up being taken into one character. It's all very iterative and quite organic, and it's why it just takes quite a long time. It's not something that you can sit down and say, "Oh, today we are going to." Decide which characters to cull from this story. It'd be much quicker if we could, but maybe someone's found a shortcut. If you have, let us know. But we do it through iterative drafts, and we'll always start drafting and going through and working through the actual story and what's happening, and that will go on for months. And we won't show anybody anything from that stage because no one needs. It's just no one needs to see it at that point because
we don't know what it is yet.
Yeah, we don't know what it is.
Once we know what it is, then people can start seeing it and giving us helpful feedback. But if we go in unsure, then that doesn't work, does it?
Yeah, well, if you
definitely not.
You know what you want, right?
Exactly.
Because I'm just being naive and sort of looking from the outside in. I can imagine there being it's really multifaceted in writing this, right? Because obviously, as you say, not only are you, in comparison to my normal guests who are really just about making music or composing for screen for a very specific a scene or shot or whatever it might be, you're not only building the characters like an actual author, as you say, you're redesigning the story to fit in with your new interpretation of it. You're then actually having to write songs or around specific elements or sort of scenarios that are happening in that. Now, obviously, that's far beyond a normal sort of, let's say, what an artist would do writing just a normal song or whatever. Now, where do you start with trying to actually write a song so specific about, this point in the journey, about this specific scenario or situation? Where do you get the creativity to make that?
It's fun to explore the character itself, and that character will often inform us of what they should be singing, their tone, the style of music. A good example might be in Pigs Might Fly with Farmer Rafferty, who's quite a gruff character, and so he has kind of clunkier music, and he's a bit gruffer, and all of those sounds kind of come in, and he also has maybe a simplistic way of thinking, so then the lyrics are therefore simplistic as well, whereas you'll move on to another character who's highly educated.
Or Diana the sheep, who's quite hyperactive and bouncy. And that her character lends itself to a different style of music and a different tone of lyrics.
Exactly.
And thought process as well.
Yeah. Sorry, no, please.
I'd say quite often early on in the development of a show, I think we'll write a song that just is a starter and it's a feeler in to encapsulate what's going on and what we're trying to do. Quite often it then just gets ditched on the wayside or bits of it end up somewhere else. But that's just quite a helpful way in structurally and tonally for us, just to try and feel our way into the show.
Yeah, of course. It's quite an empathetic thing as well, right? Obviously, you're having to put yourself in all these different characters' shoes, exactly as you just said there, Caroline. And that's such a mind-blowing thing for me is actually, you've got to think what's the intellect of this person? How would they approach this, or what type of language they use? There's things you really don't take into consideration. Do you find that either of you are better placed for certain type of characteristics? Would it be like, all right, this person is the gruff person, oh, that's going to be... No.
This one's super grumpy, Jen. I'm just kidding, Jen is never grumpy.
It depends whether I've been fed regularly or not.
You've got a cup of tea, right?
I've got my cup of tea.
But do you find, as I say, that either of you sort of tend to portray particular type of characteristics?
I would say no.
Really? There are some things that just lend themselves to our background. So if you're after something very American feeling, then Caroline would probably start with that. If we were after that kind of, jolly hockey sticks English feel, then that would be something that I might just do a first draft of to start off with. But then actually it's, the outside of you often pinpoints the essence of something more easily.
I suppose once again it's that being able to bounce the ideas off both of each other, right, and find the voice that the person wants. And actually, that's a question that's just sort of popped into my head, because one of the things that I've actually had a conversation I spoke about with a couple of the previous guests, when they're trying to sort of kind of find their own voice and how they portray that in their music. Obviously, with yourself, I suppose there's a two-part question, and that's obviously how did you realise that actually, a big focus on the young the young audience was a way for you to go, and that being your voice. But then also, how do you go about sort of kind of creating that second voice for all the different characters? And I might have asked a similar question there, but it's very much around sort of kind of trying to understand the process that you would go in trying to put yourself in their shoes, as I say.
I think that's the fun of it, and I also think that's what might be different between pop music and musical theater music, in that as a pop star will continue to explore their own voice in different ways, different topics. They might slightly change genre for, an album.
Of course,
But for musical theater composers, I think that our problem is that we get incredibly bored. So I started off my early music life in the singer-songwriter world, but I just found I want to write things that are in so many different genres, and that I think is a way into other characters.
Yeah, and also the story has to lend itself to the musical style.
Of course.
So there has to be a reason for the people to be singing
absolutely.
in that style. And it doesn't mean it doesn't have to be completely authentic or historical. It doesn't have to sound exactly like a farmyard, but there needs to be a reason why these characters choose that style to express themselves.
Well, is that funny? Thank you for bringing that up, because that was actually a question I was going to come on to, is when working with, let's say, historical, real life, and sort of portraying that in your musicals, where do you sort of kind of find the balances about sort of kind of giving your own spin, as I say, but then making sure you still reflect a real person? Because that must bring its own complications, right?
Yeah, really good question.
I would say we don't worry so much about reflecting the real person.
Okay.
We worry about reflecting some element of emotional reality.
Okay, makes sense.
For that character. One example is an adaptation we've done of a children's book called Miss Moore Thought Otherwise, which is based on the woman who was one of the people who invented the children's library. And of course, she has her own personality. But we've kind of created almost like the fairy godmother version of her personality, because we pulled things from who she was, but everything is heightened and made bigger and broader when you're in the world of theater.
Yeah, of course, so
absolutely. We don't make documentaries. We aren't trying to capture perfectly historical information. If we have a real character, we'll do our homework. We do a lot of research for anything that is vaguely from the real world. But yeah, a
good example of that. So we have a show for older audiences and performers as well, called The Bachelor Girls, which is a historical show. So it's set in the period from 1918 to 1928. Okay. And that
just after the war.
Just after the war. Oh, it's fascinating. It's it's a fascinating generation as well, because it's a generation of women who grew up or came of age just after the First World War. So terrible death toll within their generation of men, but they'd been brought up to be wives and mothers as well. So actually, what do you do when you've spent your whole life being prepared to be a wife and a mother and being educated to be a wife and a mother? What do you do when suddenly you can't? And statistically, only 1 in 10 of them would ever get married, because there just weren't the young men for them to marry. But with that one, because it's so historical, we keep the period style. So we've got some harmonic rules there just between us. Hopefully no one else will notice that. That mean that they do, it sounds like it has come out of that, or it is linked to that area without trying to write pure pastiche music from it.
Okay. And obviously then, so like we've covered then like what your general, how you create your concepts. We've looked at sort of kind of what you would do with regards to sort of kind of testing it out, as you say, reviewing it after a year. How does it differ? And I don't know, I'm conscious of bouncing about a bit, but I just really want to stick on this thing about how you build it based on your audience. I mean, you've got things like Pigs Might Fly and Errol's Garden out on tour. How do you differ your show based on where you are geographically? Because not only are you touring UK, but I believe you've got a couple that are actually in Singapore right now as well, if I'm not mistaken. There you've got a massive cultural difference as well. How does that impact the actual show you're building?
Great question. With Singapore, we have worked with Singapore Repertory Theatre, who we love, and so there are different considerations when you're working in a different country.
Absolutely.
Some of them are very basic things, like there might be a slightly different word that we use here than might be used there. That's kind of simple. But they're also, if you're working in a different region, you might also have a different approach to theater. Okay. So one region might expect theater to be more literal, and another might expect something more metaphorical. So that's the sort of thing where we work with, we would work with the company, and we would lean heavily on their expertise to help us deliver something that's going to, hit the mark for their audiences, because we don't know their audiences the way that they do.
Yeah, and when Errol went to Singapore, we did some rewrites on the show. We didn't change what the show was, but we massaged it to fit for an audience and to meet the expectations of that audience, as Caroline says, both from very practical, like, do they know what pesto is? Probably not. Therefore, what's the equivalent there? To the more like, what are the theatrical expectations? It's a bit like if you go to America, no one has that panto tradition. So you can't, in England, you can reference panto and you can expect your audience to know. If you say that to an English audience, they'll know exactly where you are and what's going on. But if you go and do that to an American audience, they don't have that background because they don't go and see panto when they're from the age of 5 upwards. So it's just knowing that and working with people who can help navigate that. It shouldn't change the show inherently, but you do need to look at it.
Yeah, of course. And I'm like, and once again, maybe this is me being naive, but sort of kind of the points you've made there, right? You've got metaphorical instead of literal, or the other way around. You've got cultural differences. You've got even the things like, panto for me is just part of the humour. And as you say, when you're focusing on a young audience, or certainly in many cases, having that level of like young engagement removed. And obviously, once again, I appreciate this might be a question for the people you work with, but how would you adapt to that but still keep that energy up and still keep that engagement when you're not, like, I'm so conscious of how I put this, but potentially losing so much of the general concept which makes you in the first place?
Yes. Although I'd maybe say that especially when you're creating a family show, I think it's very important not to assume any cultural references for an audience, especially if we're working in the younger age ranges, so sort of 3 to 8. Some children may have a lot of cultural capital and may have engaged with lots of different things.
But the panto element is what I kind of look at the cultural thing. Like, as you say, the UK, they know what a panto is. The kids are going to be, he's behind you. You can have the bad guys sneaking around. But if that element doesn't exist in somewhere else, how would you?
Yeah, I would actually say that I think we would probably shy away from writing anything that has that expectation, just because of the work that we create. It doesn't fit in within there. And children are a really distinct audience to work for, especially the under 8s, because they have very, very strong expectations and knowledge. They are very literal.
Yeah.
So anything that involves any kind of metaphor at all, they don't get, but they will listen to every single lyric out there, and they need it to make logical sense, and they will interrogate it, and they will tell you if it doesn't make logical sense. So you can't sit there with children from any country and say, I am a fluffy cloud floating, because they will say, no, that is not a fluffy cloud.
Clouds aren't really fluffy.
They're not fluffy. It's not floating. Actually, clouds are made of small molecules of water. And I would say that the bigger challenge is actually getting into that mindset and knowing that, which I think is true to children wherever they live, because it's all about brain development and how it works. So you have to step back, not assume any kind of cultural
Or as you say,
knowledge.
If you're getting that foundation correct anyway, you're addressing what is a universal truth for kids? They're going to take it literally. You address that first. I suppose you're putting yourself in the best graces you could in the first place. So when you do take it on tour, coming back to my tour question, what are the biggest sort of kind of challenges you do find then when sort of kind of going from one venue to another? Because that must in itself must be quite a challenge. Just knowing, you've built stage, you've built props, you've rehearsed based
Definitely not us personally, by the way.
But then transitioning that to a completely new venue, where even maybe where the audience are sitting in a different place, what other challenges, and I'm saying that's a challenge, it might not be, but what challenges do you find you face when going on tour?
Yeah, there are some parameters that you can set. So if we had touring a show, then you can say, it works best in venues of this kind of size. Okay. So, kind of 100 to 300 seater venues. And then the venues who are taking the show know what to expect. Yeah. And you can specify, it will work for these seating configurations, but you couldn't do it in the round. Because that's very specific. So you have some control, and also no venue wants to take a show that where their audience sits all the way around the stage, but they just won't take it. So that's a conversation that you can have much earlier on. A very practical one is usually with lighting, because especially at the smaller scale. So with some of our shows, like Errol's Garden or Miss Moore thought otherwise. They're designed to play in different styles of venues, so they can play in community venues that don't have large lighting rigs, but they can also go and sit in studio theatres that have absolutely beautiful tech as well. I think it's knowing that in advance as writers, so knowing where you want it to be able to go. And to an extent, I think that if the writing works, and you should be able to stand up and have a really good performer, do the show with nothing else, and that should work. You know, if that doesn't work, then you're in trouble. You have trouble anyway. If you're relying on lighting and effects, then there's something wrong with the show. But it's knowing the parameters, and that this may well tour to shows that don't have that kind of tech. So it's a bonus if it's there. So, for example, Errol has very simple lighting states. Okay. And that's our brilliant lighting designer, Holly Ellis, making sure that it can do that, so that it can play with just one general wash if it needs to. And then if you are in a venue that can have more states, then you can just bring out a little bit more. But it works both ways. Right. So it's baked in right from the beginning.
So obviously something you mentioned there was obviously you're taking into consideration when you're writing then. So would you actually write a musical knowing that you're going to take this one specifically on tour? Or would it be a case of you wrote it to be like, and it just did well, then you take it on tour and have to do a rewrite? How would that work?
We know. Yeah. We know right away. It impacts how we write it.
Of course.
And sometimes it's the other way round as well. So the story lends itself to a certain format as well. I
was going to say, what I was going to ask then was, like, how do you decide what ones you want to take on tour then? Is it just a case of, well, I'll let you answer rather than me assuming. But yeah, how would you decide, right, okay, this one's going for tour?
A lot of it does come down to funding.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
A lot of it is practical, and we do get a lot of funding through the Arts Council and other sources.
I would say the default for family theatre is that you are going to tour.
Oh, really?
Because it's very hard to sit in a large venue for a long space of time with a show, especially if it's not a very well-known IP as well. Like Hey Dougie, Bluey, they can probably go and sit somewhere for a couple of weeks, or in the holidays they could sit, and there's enough audience to come and watch them. But also just the practicalities of writing for a family audience. If you've got a small child, you do not want to be travelling with them. Anyone who's got a 4-year-old, if it's longer than a half-hour bus journey, it's not happening. They're not going. So you have to take the theatre to the families, because potty training beats any other consideration when you're going to the theatre. It needs to be convenient, and you need to be able to get back for nap time and dinner time and bedtime. So I think that's a very long-winded way of saying the default assumption is that if you're writing family theatre, it's going to tour and it's going to need to travel around to different venues, because your audience can't come to you. You've got to go to your audience.
And that's a great way, too, of us making sure that we're reaching diverse audiences as well. We're not just going to sit in, a particular place in London where a particular demographic will come. We go everywhere that we can go practically, which takes us out of London and into different regions. And also one interesting thing is just to see how the show does land differently with different audiences from different parts of the country. Different jokes land in different parts of the country. And that's always fun to
Really fun to
speculate
see.
about.
She just started the wings like, oh, that one didn't work.
Yeah.
They are in hysterics.
Yeah. How many shows would you, or different venues, or how long in regards to time period would you try to keep a play going then? A musical going, should I say?
I suppose that's really a business decision rather than a creative one. We work with some fantastic general managers, DEM Productions, and so they tour a lot of our shows. So to an extent, they help us with that, and they're the guide on that side.
Do you follow them round, or is it literally just kind of you outsource it to the company and they go do it?
The show will go on tour without us, but we visit the show regularly, so we check in and make sure everyone is doing okay. And it's
because you want to see what the different audiences are doing. So we'll always look at where the show's going and say, "Oh, right, that's a different sized venue, or a different style of venue, or a different area that we haven't had work in before. Let's make sure that one of us goes there and just feels it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any, what are the biggest lessons you've kind of learned from travelling around with them a little bit that's maybe you now build into when you're sort of starting a new musical, you're writing it from today, what's the biggest lessons you've learned to go, right, okay, if we're doing it in this area, we have to do X, for example? Is there anything that stands out like that?
Oh, actually, the thing that I was going to mention before you mentioned that was realising how hard the team have to work when they're out there.
Oh, really?
Because touring as a performer and a stage manager, it's a hard job, and they're amazing people. And I think just recognising that within the show itself, and not asking them to go right to the extremes of their voices, at 11 o'clock in the morning and then 1 o'clock in the morning.
And then the same again the next day.
Once they've already got the train up there then got, help get the set out of the venue. So I think it's made us very conscious of what we're asking the team to do, and would definitely bear that in consideration within the writing, especially if a show's touring.
Fair. So are there any memorable locations that you've been on that really stand out to you, or even specific plays that the musicals that you wrote that that was epitome for me of my career so far?
You go.
Yeah. They're both of you at the same time. I love it. It's a gasp of air.
This is going to sound completely the opposite to the question that you just asked, but one of my absolute favourite memories is actually when we were doing a very small R&D tour of Miss More Thought Otherwise, which is, as Caroline mentioned earlier, about one of the first children's librarians who actually created a library space for children in the New York Public Library. So we were doing a small tour, and as part of that, we were in one of the libraries in Lewisham, and it was completely open to the public. Anybody could wander in, anybody could wander out. So it wasn't traditional theatre in that way. And I could see on the periphery there was, a little boy who I think he'd just been brought into the library because it was raining outside, and his mum wanted to just pop in for a bit. Yeah. And she kept trying to say, no, it's time to go now. Let's go. And he absolutely wasn't having any of it. He stayed the whole way and just joined in from the outside. And that's really exciting, because that's what it's about. It's taking shows and theatre into somewhere and surprising someone.
Love that.
Yeah.
How about yourself, Caroline?
I was just reminded of the time Pigs Might Fly was in Milton Keynes, and it had an unusually large audience. Okay. And there's a part in the story where Errol says something to the audience.
Not Errol in Pigs Might Fly.
Oh, sorry. That's okay. Confusing shows. It's
Diana the Sheep?
Diana the Sheep speaks directly to the audience, asks a question of the audience, which was a one-line question meant to get like a few kids here and there just spouting something out, and then you carry on with the story. But because the audience was so large, the whole theater just like echoed with all these children shouting out their answers, and they had to just wait until all the shouting died down and then carry on.
As you say, from watching him, something you've created to get that sort of response, what a feeling that must be, right? But I put it to you, well, when you go and see your new show, it's out for the first time. What's the emotions you go through?
Oh, goodness. Well, for the first time.
terror. Yeah, absolute terror. Because you know that something's going to need to be changed or tweaked.
Yeah, but you don't know what it is until
until you're there.
Until it's up.
Once it's settled and the show is what it is, and we're comfortable, and it's going... What was the question?
How do we feel?
So what emotions go through you, like when you're watching? Maybe a more established one that you've got that. Let's say that the early days, you've got the creases ironed out and all that. But he's now going out. You're happy with it. What's you're sitting there watching it? Something like Milton Keynes. What's going through your mind? What emotions are you feeling?
I think, well, every writer's different, and usually there's some sort of sign of anxiety with all writers watching their own work. For me, I feel like I'm calm, but then like my hands go completely numb while I'm watching it, and I'm like, please laugh at the joke. Here comes the joke. The joke is coming. They laughed.
I love that. Just literally that anticipation. Oh my God, please laugh.
Yeah, there's always just this unfounded fear that they're not this audience isn't going to get it this time.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you do about that. Because you just sit there, and every single show, even when you know that it works and it's been tried and tested and proved, you still sit there and you're like, what if they don't get it? What if they don't laugh in the places that we expect them to, or engage in the places? What if they all need to go to the toilet? What if every single child in the audience starts asking for snacks? It's because that's both the amazing and terrifying thing about writing for young audiences is that they tell you immediately if they're not engaged, and it's different. Adults will they'll disengage. They'll just disengage and start thinking about their next week or whatever they're doing tomorrow, and they'll switch off, and you can feel an adult audience switching off as well, but they do it quietly, mostly, and they're generally quite polite about it, mostly. Whereas kids, they'll just turn round to whoever's with them and go, "Why? Why did that just happen? It doesn't make sense." But so you know that you're going to get that feedback immediately.
Have you ever had it the other way round, when actually children have erupted when a moment they really shouldn't have, or it wasn't intended?
Oh, probably.
I
mean, this isn't quite what you mean, I think, but we work so hard on crafting the show, and to get those jokes to land, and to get just the rhythm and the pacing.
And pacing it with the director as well.
One time I remember when we did Michael Mapurgo's Mimi and the Mountain Dragon was an example of a time where we wrote into the script that Papa should snore. He's in bed, he should snore. And this snoring was so funny to these children. They just laughed their heads off. And it's like, we have worked so hard on the show, and all the actor had to do was snore. So that's maybe an example of...
Oh, you say that, but it has to be integral to the show as well.
It does have to be.
Reason that he does it. I mean, like, someone farting just in isolation is not funny.
It's not funny.
Yeah, even to a 4-year-old, just someone farting is not that funny. But if they're farting for a reason and there's a plot point that hinges on that, like the snoring, it suddenly does become very funny. Yeah, exactly.
I love that. So we've really gone through the way you bring your concepts to life, which I absolutely love, and the fact that you're going for all these different characters, building it out based based on their traits and who they are. When you then take that through to the production, and obviously we've said about going to different venues, but I think we missed out a big chunk. Probably my fault for jumping here, there and everywhere. But actually then taking it to I don't know, a casting company and being like, right, this is the idea, that's how I build it out. Taking that concept to production. What's that process like? Where how does that work?
I love it.
Oh, really?
Do you love
that's
it?
Good.
Yeah, it's hugely collaborative.
It's really collaborative.
Within your team.
That's where everything comes alive, and you get all the amazing people who come and work with you, from director, stage manager, lighting,
designers,
sound, musical directors, casting directors,
so many talented
actors,
people,
so
right?
many, and you just that's the bit where there wasn't anything there before, and something exists that didn't exist before, and for me that's the real magic of theatre, that there was literally nothing, and now there's a show and an idea and something that's alive.
It come to life, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And how about for yourself then, Caroline? Is like, what's your sort of kind of, how do you feel about seeing it come to life? What goes through your head?
I really enjoy when we get into the casting room and you see the actor that is the character. When you you hear the voice and you see them and you go, that's them. That's the character that we made up in our head and they exist.
Do you get involved with the casting and things like that then?
We'll generally be there.
Yeah.
Especially in the early days of a show as well. Because it's so integral to what the show becomes as well.
That's
because that person,
yeah.
especially the first cast, that person will start embodying the character. And as Caroline says, it's really weird sitting on the other side of the casting table because you just have these wonderful, talented people come in and sometimes you look at someone and go, you are amazingly talented and wonderful, but you are not... You're just not quite Diana the sheep, or the character, but I absolutely want to keep you at the back of my mind for all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And then someone will come in, and you're like, oh yes, that is Farmer Rafferty, and that's how he was in our minds, and that's quite magical, actually.
Yeah. Is there any characters that have been cast that have really stood out to you, like whether it was a case that they were just the perfect person, or a character just across the endless amount of musicals you wrote that really stand out to you and will become perhaps one of your favourite characters?
Oh, you can't ask us to pick favourites. That's like having to pick your favourite child. No, one of the ones that
you know exactly your favourite child.
No, it's not my favourite, but it's a really good example of how an actor sort of starts embodying the character. So when we were casting Pigs Might Fly, our first pint size, who's the lead pig in it, was this amazing actor, Jazz Triadi, who's now, I want to say she's just joined Hadestown. That's where I know. She's brilliant. But she... just her physicality, she's quite small, and just that physicality and energy that she brought to it, that really fed into the choreography and the style and what Pint Size did and how the character was. And Pint Size has been cast many different ways with tall people, short people, different size people, but that has stayed with the character. That's that kind of coiled energy that she had with it, and that was really exciting. That's a good example of how an actor can shape the character and why it's so exciting to see that.
Wait, have you ever found that actually that the way that you foresaw a character being and their sort of kind of way that they will come across? I know, and I'm kind of going off sort of topic slightly, but I know when sort of the Lee Child was talking about the actress Wilhelmina, whatever her name is, on the first Reacher series, it was like she portrayed his character that he wrote so much better than he originally wrote, and he was just wowed and was like, I really wish I wrote the character to be as strong as her. Have you ever found that with what you've done? It's actually someone's kind of come in, giving it their own interpretation, their own spin, and actually it's made the character better.
I think what I've noticed is if you are working with a director that you really trust in the casting process, sometimes they can see a potential that as non-directors we can't tap into. We have a pretty good sense.
Of course.
But there have been a few occasions where maybe a person was cast who's maybe our second choice. But actually, when they get on stage, you think, oh, the director was right.
Yeah.
So the director is always right.
They're always right.
We should say that.
Yeah, they're always right.
They're always right.
Just let them do their thing. So I think we've been surprised, maybe not hugely surprised, because we always have good people and we always expect them to be good, but sometimes they go above and beyond what we expected for them.
I love that. So I want to move on a little bit now. I think I've kind of gone on to, I've badgered you enough with the way that you bring everything to life. Jen, I want to come to you, and we want to go to a little bit of your individuality and what you both.
Okay.
I know, it's great, right? Obviously, look, University of Oxford, obviously, then met Caroline at Goldsmiths, but you do a lot, not just with obviously the musical writing, but you're composers. We know you've done a lot of orchestrating in both, obviously, on stage, on screen, on radio. How do you differentiate between them when you're starting to sort of kind of formulate ideas on whatever you're doing there?
Oh, I love the combination of all the different things. They feed into each other. So it's really, really different parts of your brain. So writing musical theatre, you have to start with absolutely everything and you have to narrow it down.
Yeah.
And make it what it is. And then orchestration's almost the opposite.
You
start with someone's vocal score usually, and then your job is to take that and make it into what's inside the composer's head already. And just that. So it's coming at it from exactly the opposite way, but it feeds into each other, and orchestrating makes me a better composer and composing makes me a better orchestrator. And I love both of them and that balance.
Because
also, you just get to work with some really amazing composers.
Yeah,
and that's always really inspiring.
Well, you've actually had some quite sort of kind of high profile, what's the word for? Some quite high profile projects.
Thank you.
You've done a lot with the BBC. I believe you did sort of kind of Bonnie and Clyde, and just referring back to, I think you did Wasted to BBC Radio. Is that correct? Wasted on BBC Radio. No, that doesn't sound like it. Right, cut that bit out. Well, I just want to keep it. I like being wrong. So, you worked for BBC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, what was it you did with BBC then?
So I've done a lot of live radio and live published events. So I'm trying to think, sort of like big D-Day celebrations, Battle of Britain. That was amazing because they had a full Spitfire on stage, and I spent a lot of time like wandering around a Spitfire in between rehearsals. But it's a completely different beast because you've got the amazing BBC Concert Orchestra brought in, and it's a different sound world and a different way of thinking about it. So again, different scale to musical theatre, and it's a different feel to it, different parts of the brain, different but complementary skills.
So
I'm going to say.
How would you tailor your approach to something like that then? Because as I say, we've spoken a lot today about how you sort of going to quite introvert in many ways by you two working, in the shadows, writing your books, and then suddenly you're out in a very public domain, sort of putting something on like across a Spitfire for D-Day on BBC. How do you tailor your approach, and what would go through your mind in a scenario like that?
Oh, it depends entirely on what the project is. But as an orchestrator, you are hired to create something that someone else has commissioned. So actually one of the best ways that I've ever heard anyone describe it was that orchestrators are the cabinet makers of the music industry. You are hired to create a cabinet, and usually someone will come and say, I would like a black cabinet to fit in this corner here. And you can say, brilliant, yes. Well, maybe if we use this, I'm talking metaphorically here, obviously, but, if we use
course.
this sheen and
Yeah.
this cage and, you know, maybe let's have this number of shelves on it and there, then that's all part of the process. But you have to, it's keeping that conversation going with the person, usually either the composer, especially if it's musical theatre, or the producer if it's a larger live event, so that you've got the feel right, because
Absolutely.
orchestration takes a piece of music and makes it more of what it is.
Yeah.
So everyone has to agree on what that music is. Because the last thing you want to do is rock up at your band calls with this absolutely amazing thing that you think you've created. And everyone sits there and goes, no, that was not the style that we had in mind. So it's all about keeping that dialogue open and that conversation going, which in a perfect world is very easy to do because you have lots and lots of time. Sometimes in musical theatre is trickier to do because everything's happening so quickly, especially in new shows where everything's being put on. So I think it's really important to make sure it's the relationship between the composer and orchestrator is really important, and knowing what they're thinking. So that you can realise that, because you're realising their music and their wishes. And hopefully bringing something that they hadn't thought of. It's like talking about the actors when we create the show. You want someone who embodies what you saw, but maybe brings something that you hadn't imagined to it as well. But if you're creating your cabinet and they've asked for a black cabinet that fits in that corner, you cannot create them an absolutely massive 3-piece suite that doesn't fit in the wrong colour. That's not your job. That's not what you're hired to do.
Yeah, fair. And would you normally sort of how would you do that? Would you have like a lot of talks and interviews with them? Is it a lot of rehearsals off the back of it to show what you've put together? How does it
usually quite a lot of sound world work. So I had the absolute pleasure of working with Josh Schmidt, who's a composer I love working with, and we were doing one of his shows, Killing the Cat, and we had an absolutely massive playlist of musical influences and just sound worlds and thoughts and what was going on, because that was very individual music, I'm going to say. It's sort of like Aphex Twin and Schubert had this weird love child. But knowing that and spending a lot of time working through that actually made the process of orchestrating the show much quicker and easier and smoother. But you've got to put in the legwork for it as well.
So it's a lot of work to begin with to hopefully deliver something epic.
Yeah, and it's a relationship as well. And the more time that you have to develop that relationship, the better. The shows that I really love doing are those ones where I get to spend time with the composer, really digging into what's into their head. The ones where you always come away like just a little bit, I wish we'd had more time to just really interrogate what that sound world was. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's just practicalities and you have to just run with it.
You've got to do the best with the time you've got, right? Did you find that a lot then is that you come away feeling you haven't, and this is a very strong term, I must admit, but where you feel that you haven't potentially done it as much justice as you could have done?
No, never that. I just really like talking to composers. really, the more time I get spent doing that, the happier I am. There's nothing where I've lost my train of thought.
It's all good. I've got another question for you anyway.
Go
Obviously,
for it.
you mentioned the D-Day sort of event that you did, but maybe it might have been that one. But is there any sort of kind of one scenario where you have sort of kind of put this orchestra together or orchestrated it that really stands out to you as like, that was my great moment, or that was my wonderful time, or whatever it might be? That was a dreadful way
Again,
of asking.
you can't do that. You can't do that.
It's going to carry on happening. I like putting people on the spot.
Okay.
Maybe just something that means a lot to you.
Something that really means. I really love colour instruments and different colours. So I I absolutely loved working on a show called For Tonight, which is written by Chanel Salcedo and Spencer Williams. That did a one-night concert at the Adelphi, but it's a Welsh Romani musical.
Okay.
So it draws on Welsh music tradition, on the Romani music tradition, and it's got a sort of pop rock based score. But the colours that we got to use in there, I really loved that. It was kind of lots of harp, lots of really interesting reeds.
That classical coming
as well.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
So I really like colour and different, just something that makes a score feel a little bit distinct and individual, and just makes it what it is, so that song couldn't have come from a different musical. There's a reason that sound has to be there, and that has to be worked through the band as well. Amazing. While we're talking about colour, the strangest and place that I've loved going most as an orchestrator, I went and did the 4th Islamic Games in Baku, in Azerbaijan. Wow. I know, it was brilliant. And that was a massive, massive project. You had the RPO and then the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and then that was all recorded at Abbey Road in the UK.
Amazing.
And then that was a week there. It was all Azerbaijani music, so I didn't know any of it at all, and it was all from a variety of different styles, right from sort of old traditional. Right through to modern pop via this amazing Soviet tradition that they have within the country because of their history. Of course, and it's such an amazing musical melting pot. But they still got their traditional instruments, so I got to go out to Baku and spend a week recording with all the traditional instruments and players out there. It was just the colours and the different musical styles that I got to work with there. Absolutely loved.
Do you find that when you do sort of kind of get involved with something of that grandeur, that actually it's more emotive, and that when people are playing, that they actually they're more emotional themselves, and that comes across in any way?
No, it's really strangely the opposite way around, really? I think.
Really?
Because the bigger it is, the more that everything's under time pressure.
Right, okay.
So,
if you're too worried about getting it sorted.
If you've got the RPO at Abbey Road, then you've got a schedule and you are sticking to that. And, everyone's there and you play it through, and it has to be because it's so big. It strangely becomes less personal, if that makes sense. It's really exciting for other reasons.
Yeah, it does make sense, yeah.
But actually, the more personal and connected bands are always smaller.
Yeah, okay.
Because they're part of the show, and because they're so small, they exist within it.
I love it. Good, thank you for that. That was a good answer. Not what I expected, but actually makes a lot of sense. Caroline, we're coming on to you. You haven't got away with this, don't worry. So I'd love you to tell us about your Sutton Steams and what that initiative is, what you're involved with.
So I guess Jen in her kind of other life does orchestration. In my other life, I do a lot of community work that involves music and art and some storytelling events that I might do through Sutton Council. Sometimes they'll bring me on a freelance basis to do special projects, which I really, really enjoy doing. And I also do some teaching of music through Sutton Music Trust. So it's a lovely way for me to, I feel a sense of balance, because on one hand we might be in a casting session with, brilliant West End actors and all these amazing high-profile people. And then in the next instance, I have a 6-year-old who is learning where middle C is on the piano. And I really love having that broad of an experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I find it really rewarding. And even just watching kids learn and engage with music is a lot of the same feeling as watching them engage with our shows. Yeah. It's that same kind of rewarding feeling that you hope that something that you're giving them is staying with them
Absolutely.
in a positive way, something they can build on. I really enjoy working with young musicians. I teach composition and a bit of piano through Sutton Music Trust. And from the very beginning, I try to get my kids writing songs. So I say, do you have any songs to show me? Can you show me? Can you bring them in and play them for me? That sort of thing. And also sometimes if you have a kid who's not engaging with the sheet music in their book, sometimes it's because it's not creative enough for them.
Okay.
So giving them that license to be creative right from the beginning rather than it being something that you kind of have to earn the right to be after 5 years of piano studies, because it should be just organic, just like learning the piano. You should learn to write songs and to have that bravery to just try something.
Yeah, so did you find that sort of kind of educational element and what you're doing there with Steam then, do you think that sort of impacts how you would approach writing a musical with Jennifer?
I don't know if it so much affects how we would write, but it keeps me in the touch with kids.
Okay.
So I'm always I'm with kids. I know how they think. I hear the things that they say. I know what they like. I know the music that they want to play.
Yeah.
I know the pop music that they're into. And so in that sense, even though my kids are getting slightly older, I still have contact with a younger age group, which is really fun.
Absolutely. And I'm going to be a question, I think you were kind of touching on it there, but is there any like surprising way that someone young has actually inspired you in your writing in any way? We're talking a lot about you inspiring them and educating. Has it gone the other way?
I can think of one project we did during lockdown where we invited kids to write songs for a song competition, and then Jen orchestrated it. And then
that was really fun.
And then we brought in a West End.
That was so much fun.
And then we brought in a West End actor to sing it and record it. So
That's
this little girl
Love
got
that.
her song professionally orchestrated and recorded.
And then sung by Courtney Stapleton, who was absolutely amazing.
What a cool competition.
I mean, I'm quite jealous.
It
was a fab song as well. She was great.
Yeah, it was a really, really good song. But I guess we love to see kids being creative, and they're going to be the next generation that comes up and eventually replaces us someday.
What do you mean eventually? We're out of it now.
Have you ever thought about doing anything like that, where it's a bit more collaborative with an external source, such as, I don't know, obviously look, you're going to have your own, you're going to make it work and make it actually make sense. But do you sort of kind of ever sit down with kids and go, right, okay, give us some ideas. What do you want a child, or is it always based off a book?
You know what? I think that devised theatre is such a specific skill.
Right, okay.
I'm not going to speak for Caroline. I am too much of a control freak to be able to engage with it in the way that I know it deserves to be engaged with. I have so much respect for it, and it just fills me with all kinds of fear. I think there are some people...
Never work with kids, eh?
Yes,
Kids
not
are
even
animals.
that. I think there are some people who get a massive buzz from going into a room and not knowing what's there and what they're going to come out with, and like teasing those threads out. And that's my idea of hell. And it just comes part and parcel with it. It's why I love orchestration. You know, all the prep work is done before. And if I have not prepped and I do not know exactly how it's going to sound, I have failed. You know, that's not my job. So it's just such a different mentality. Yeah. I'm in awe of devised work, but the thought of doing it brings me out in hives.
I think I agree, because for me the story structure is so crucial, and you don't know if you're going to come out of a room where something has been devised with any kind of coherent story structure. I mean, hopefully you can, and there are probably people who can do this with a group of people.
Skills to edit and bring it together and gel things together.
Yeah. So it's not our skill set. Devising is not our skill set.
Well, if you don't mind, let's come back onto your collaboration then, because you've actually, and obviously let's talk about your skill set. You've got some fantastic accolades, and I'm going to refer to the.
Oh my goodness! Wow! I'm quite learning now.
Well, I'm talking. Let's be honest. You were finalist in the SNS Award for Best New Musical. You were finalist in the Styles and Drew Mentorship Award for Best New Song. You were finalist in the Cameron McIntosh Resident Composer Scheme. You've worked at the Beam Festival, the She NYC Festival, and so on. Just kept looking really at my sort of kind of core question. What have you learned from sort of kind of navigating these different arenas and these different sort of award ceremonies that you've been part of? What have you learned from them, and how has that impacted what you do now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the really flippant answer is that it's really frustrating always being the bridesmaid, isn't it?
I must have sorry.
I think
it's to come, girls. It's to come.
I think any writers are going to have mixed feelings about the world of awards, for different reasons.
Of course, fair.
They're really important. They're one facet of what's important.
I think that's the point, though, right? One facet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of an incredibly multifaceted arena, let's be an industry.
Yeah. Yes. I think they're important for a writer. What an award can do is it can become like a passport for them to work in different areas.
Okay.
It gives them kind of a stamp of approval.
It's validation, right?
Undeniable.
Yeah.
I feel like once you get a high level award, you can no longer, people can't kind of snicker at you like they don't belong in the industry. You just can't.
Find this picture.
So I think that's why they're helpful, but they're also not the end all and the be all.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to get sucked into a mentality where you try and write for a specific reason that's not why you want to write. So I think that it's dangerous. There's a dangerous temptation that hopefully we've resisted to write for awards or to write for a different reason. Whereas actually I think the reason that you have to write is because there's a story that you want to tell, and this is the way that you have to tell it. And if you're going to do that, you have to write what you are writing and what you have to write. And if it then goes and does something and picks up awards, great.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, that has to be okay, because you have to write it for the right reasons. Otherwise, everything becomes very cynical, I think.
Yeah, and I think sometimes just getting a commission that you really want is better than an award.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because an award isn't going to really do anything for you other than, say good job, maybe give you a little money.
Open doors to
It's
an important part of the ecosystem.
It can, but point being just that getting a commission opens the door and gets your shows out there. So
and it's just so important to write the right things for the right reasons.
Absolutely.
And I think if it's very easy to be sucked away from that.
So what would your take on the current landscape be then? Because obviously you've mentioned that there are a lot of awards out there, and ladies,
there should be more. There should be absolutely
hesitation to say you will be the winner soon. I've no doubt in that.
But genuinely, it's fine if that doesn't happen, because I think that one thing that we're very conscious that we don't write things for in order to be the winners. We have to write stuff that we want to write because we have to write it because it's important. It's an important story that has to be told, be it about flying pigs or, women after in the 1920s coming of age there and not being able to marry as they expected. It's different. Yeah.
Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head of the next question I was going to go on to, and I'm very conscious of how I put this. How has it been being a female writer or two female writers? Is that... obviously, look, this is a day and age when it's very much, DEI is absolutely, the big talking point, as it should be. But do you feel that's
really? I thought that GEI was so last year. I think it depends what country you're in.
DEI, I think so. I think it's big wherever you are.
Sorry, feel free to cut out my little
No. It's
comments.
political asides.
About my homeland.
What you're saying? I didn't mention your homeland.
In the UK, now, so here, don't you worry. You're part of us anyway, so don't worry, Carol. We got your back.
Thanks.
But no, in all seriousness, though, look, it's a very important thing to cover, right? I'm sitting in front of two phenomenally gifted and talented ladies who have got a very passionate career in this industry. Had you been men, do you think it would have been different? Do you think you would have been further? And it's such a horrible thing to think about. But do you think you've been affected? Starts the question now. Do you think it's impacted your career in any way?
I think Jen and I are hesitating because it's a very politically
Please
sensitive.
be honest. The point of this show, right, is look. The reason, let me be clear. Right, the reason I ask is you're the first musical theatre guest I've got on. You're the first duo. You've clearly had a phenomenal career. But let's say there is a young woman out there who is looking to get into this arena, to release their own musicals. Do they need to do anything different than what a man might have to? Have you had to do anything different? Has it caused any obstacles for you?
It's really hard to say because you don't know what it would have been. I think the one thing that we are conscious of and that everyone should be conscious of is that it's an industry of networks.
Absolutely.
And that's really important. I feel like we're really lucky to be writing at this time when people are recognising that and looking at that. So Georgia Stitt has set up the Maestra Network in the US, which is also global. So we're both members of that. And that brings together women in the musical theatre industry, just for, not just for moral support, but very practical events as well. So I work, I'm part of their mentoring scheme. So, for example, I will mentor people who are interested in orchestration through that as well. I wish that had existed when I was younger, because I feel like that kind of thing, that informal networking and the informal mentoring is really important as part of the industry. And I think everybody is guilty of wanting to provide that for people in whom they recognise themselves. And I would absolutely include myself in that. So if you see someone just starting out who reminds you of yourself when you were that age, then you are more inclined to help them.
Absolutely,
and
of course.
That's... gender is not the only thing about that, but it is a thing, and I don't think it's gradually building down. I would also should mention that I've very much been fortunate to have some absolutely wonderful male mentors. Mike Dixon, I wouldn't have a career without him, and he's fantastic and always just been there and fulfilled that role. But it's different, and sometimes gender does play a part in just who will give you a little helping hand and help and support, gentle support.
Of course.
Tell you that that's not good enough. And it does need to be better, and you can do better. Yeah. And it's all very informal, and I think that's where it makes a difference. And that's why it's important, and that's why Maestra is really important. Ladies of the Stave exists in the UK. It helps, and it just opens up that area with a focus on breaking down those barriers.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think for me, a few men in the industry that have been really great for me, just kind of on a mentorship level, would be like David Spencer, Julian Wolford, John Sparks, and really, really appreciate everything I've been able to learn from them. I think there were times when I wished I had a female mentor. Especially when you start getting into the time of life where you're having kids And it's been said about us, and I may not be true, but we're the only all-female writing partnership that are also mothers in the UK.
Wow.
So I don't know. There's probably someone's going to crop up
I
now.
hope that someone is going to come and prove us wrong.
I was going to say, that seems quite...
Yeah.
Like,
Well, being
horrible to
female is
think,
quite
really.
unusual as writers in the
Fine.
industry. Being mothers is also
Next
quite
level.
next level unusual. It's also, to be honest, just really quite hard.
It's very hard.
It's great.
That's why it takes 3
very
years
tough.
to write, because after a year and a half, you don't even have kids.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you often female writers will start to kind of drop out of the running, so to speak. And I watch them and I go, I get it. And I don't blame you at all. And then if you have kids on top of that, it's one more thing that makes it a challenge.
Now, one of the points you mentioned there, Caroline, was that you wish you'd have had a female mentor. But then I look at what you two are doing, and you've just mentioned, obviously, this is something that you're actively giving back with now. Do you feel the landscape is for the better these days? It is getting better. There are more support for females in the industry.
I think it in some ways. If you want to hear like the nitty gritty, some examples are we both had kids. Our sons were born a few months apart, and we were on a show, working on a show. John was 3 months, so that would mean Felix was 6 months.
Yeah,
and we were breastfeeding. And we had to say things like, we have to have access to a refrigerator to keep milk in.
Yeah, of course.
We have basic needs. We will have to step out and feed our kids periodically. We had to be brave enough to say what we needed.
It's crazy to think, sorry to jump in, but it's crazy to think that just wasn't a given. Really, like you had to ask for it. I appreciate sometimes people might not be thinking about it because they're tunnel vision on what the core activity, but they might need a little reminder.
I think it's both the really exciting thing and the terrifying thing about working in musical theatre, though, is that there's no set way of doing it, and no one has necessarily done it before.
Yeah.
So if you work in a large corporate firm, then there's maternity leave and there's a way of managing that, and then there's an expectation that when you go back, then your baby will be weaned, and but there's a path, and you can choose to follow that path, and you can not choose to follow that path, but at least there's a path and you know where it goes.
Well, to be honest, if you're in the middle, sorry to jump into it, but if you're in the middle of writing a 3-year musical, and then suddenly things happen, next week you're pregnant, and then during that period, that 3 years, a lot can change, and suddenly you're forced in a position where you've got to manage that.
Well, and you have to. I mean, anybody who's ever looked at statutory maternity leave, you're not stopping working because of that. You can't take a full year of maternity leave. It's just we can't do it financially, and you can't do it just in terms of career, because it's not like a corporate job, and we love it because it's not like a corporate job. Don't get me wrong, I'm not griping about that, and I'm not complaining. I'm not saying that there should be, an official year of maternity leave within the musical theatre industry if you're working on a show. No. But it's that you have to make it up as you go along.
Yeah, of course.
And sometimes it's really scary making it up as you go along, because you haven't got anybody to look at and go, oh, you did that and it worked really well, or you did that but said, oh, actually I wish I'd done it a bit differently. So you just have to, with your 6-month-old baby or whatever, you just have to go for it, choose something, hope it works out, and bring everyone along with you. And I think, I'm going to say, without any exceptions, we've never had anybody go, oh, you couldn't possibly do that because you're mothers, or it's just that you've got to know what will help and what will help the production as well, because you are ultimately there for the work, and you can absolutely have a baby with you on the sidelines, but they've got to
many times had babies with us.
But there are places where you can take babies. audition rooms, it turns out. I think I had one when we were casting Mimi and the Mountain Dragon. We just decided that if anybody had a problem with a breastfeeding 2-month-old baby in an audition room, they really weren't in the right place for a family show. So that was okay. But I also had a small child when I was doing some recording sessions at Maida Vale. And, at that point, your child really does not come into a recording session with you because that's not appropriate.
Of course.
And it will never be appropriate. So you just have to find ways round that.
Yeah.
In my case, very lovely grandparents who hang out in the cafe and you just run out on breaks. But it's not that anybody ever says no. What a ridiculous thing. Yeah. How could you think about working? No one is anti-mother or anti-baby. It's just that you have to forge a path where there wasn't one before. And that's scary to do.
Of course. I suppose working together for so long, you've been able to be each other's support network and kind of not only, in some ways, you're not on your own because you have got each other. If there was, let's say, you mentioned a couple of groups a second ago, and please repeat their names, but is there any specific support for people that might be in that position but on their own?
Yeah, absolutely. So Maestra, which is the US-based but global network that I mentioned earlier, they've got a Maestra Mums network, and
Maestra
they're
Mums.
Absolutely fantastic. It's all women creating in the musical theatre industry. And they've got a little subsection for anybody who has babies.
That's
They're
wonderful.
Brilliant.
See, that sort of support network is nice.
Yeah, and also you can make your own support network. And as we get older, I think we do that more and more. Just find people who are trying to do the same thing that you're trying to do.
And there's Pal.
Oh yeah, that's another great one. Are they
Parents
UK based?
Advocacy
They are. Yeah,
League. They're US based, I believe, aren't they?
We'll need to fact check
Yeah.
that. Don't take us for granted.
But there are cases where if you're applying for funding, you might be able to apply for a bit of extra funding for childcare.
Okay.
But that is another thing to consider with the difficulty of working in industry when you have kids, is because you're also paying childcare. So you're paying quite a lot to earn very little.
Fair enough.
You put it so succinctly. No, but it's very practical, and there are some times when it's really tricky to work, especially as your kids get older. Actually, really strangely, I found that up until with an under 8-month-old, you can do pretty much anything. The physical thing you want to do is sleep and eat, and depend obviously that everybody's different, but that was okay. But then when they get older, you suddenly find that you have set hours that you have to work in, and that's a different mentality to get into. And I think it's made me much more efficient.
Oh, both of us.
And
so efficient.
Yeah, so efficient. Because you know that you have to stop at the end of a day, which I never had to do before.
Setting boundaries and actually sticking to them.
Yeah, and if I was, if I was in the flow at 5 o'clock,
you carry on working.
because I'd just keep going, and I could keep going till midnight if I wanted to, and it's harder to now. So it's knowing that, but also working within that.
Yep.
Well, I picked a very specific point about the industry there, and obviously what your advice was today. And hopefully anyone that's out there who's sort of in that situation, they've got somewhere to go and they know they're not alone. But actually being a bit more broader, what do you think is where is the industry right now? What is the landscape like? Is it generally in good spirits? Is there anything that you think needs changing, whether it is regards to DEI, whether it's just the way certain things work? If you had your way, what would you change about it?
Oh, magic wands.
There we go. I love a crystal ball question.
No, I think we're still recovering from COVID.
Really?
Very much as an industry.
And the way that audiences choose shows has not returned. The shows that they want to see has not returned to the way it was before.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the booking patterns.
Can you elaborate on that? It'd be good to understand.
What we've noticed is that families, even in the cost of living crisis, will be more likely to take their kids to Frozen maybe once a year than to take their kids to regional theatre 5 times a year.
Oh, really?
So they'll save up their money and they'll go see the huge West End
So one big
show.
thing. Wow.
And that's has a knock-on effect for people who like us who create regional
Of course, absolutely,
theater.
It skews. Well, I don't want to say skews, but it means that as larger producers and venues are far more likely to go for well-known IP, intellectual property. Fab things, but like Bluey, families want something known, because if they're only going to go out once a year, then they need to know that their 5-year-old is really going to have the best time there, which is completely understandable. I think it just means that there's people are less more risk averse.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of booking, and that has a trickle down effect on everything. It's not just within the industry as well. I mean, I believe that the restaurant industry has exactly the same thing going on. People are still going out, but they're going out
bigger and bolder and less
for bigger, rather than going and eating at the regular like neighbourhood cafes on a smaller scale, but more regularly. And it's the same within theatre. So maybe that will settle, maybe not. I wish I had a crystal ball
of course.
for it. But again, you can't. I feel, especially because musical theatre has such long lead times in terms of writing. I mean,
you're guessing what the industry's going to be like in a few years. So
that's a fool's game. I feel like we just have to write what we think has to be written, what we have to write.
Absolutely.
And maybe that'll be the right thing, but I feel like it would be an absolute fool's game to try and predict.
Well, I was going to ask, is obviously taking into consideration the comments there about where the current sort of, let's say, the audience is and what they're buying into and how they're adopting and interacting with musicals like your own. Is that affecting what you're writing now? Are you doing less? Are you doing different? Has it impacted and changed your mindset in any way? I appreciate your comment about trying to not predict, but at the same time, you don't want to be left out on the pier on your own, right?
Well, we would never write a show that we thought people didn't want to see.
Of course.
We pick it because we pick shows because we find them exciting, and we think other people will
want to go and see them.
Yes, exactly.
I won't ask you what your favourite one is. Don't worry.
One good thing we think recently in the landscape is the writing partners who won the Olivier this year for Best New Musical, which is The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And that is, the writers are Darren Clark and Jethro Compton. And I think a lot of writers were just really cheering for them for a number of reasons. One, it's a great show and it deserves to win, obviously. But also a lot of shows, if you look back at the history of what wins the Best New Musical in the Oliviers, they very often are not developed in the UK or written by UK writers.
Right.
So they often have proved their success on Broadway.
Right, okay.
And then come over to the UK and scoop up all these awards, even though the development and the risk was taken by a different country, essentially.
Yeah, of course.
So sometimes it feels like in order to be successful in the UK, we need to go work in Broadway.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we'll be allowed to come back and work here, which is silly, obviously. But
Benjamin Button proves that it's really exciting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And an absolutely worthy winner. But before that reason, we saw the first production at the Southwark Playhouse.
Yes.
Back in, I'm not going to incorrectly say when, but it was probably a good 5-7 years ago.
Oh, yeah. So that show has been workshopped and developed painstakingly over years and years by UK writers in the UK.
And give them time to grow and breathe
Yes.
and develop into everything that it is now.
Do you think COVID has had something to do with that? Because obviously if you're going back 5-7 years, as you say, pre-COVID, when everything was easily transferred over to the UK from Broadway, but obviously now having that, a few years where that wasn't possible, so therefore people were perhaps keeping it more local or certainly in country. Do you think that could have been, obviously, great play? I've got no doubt there's a reason they won, but do you think that's part of it as well?
Probably not, because actually,
well, it's good to hear, if anything.
Because there are some tax breaks that you can get working in the UK.
Okay.
So we noticed a lot of shows that were kind of experimental things coming over to UK for the development process. A few years ago, particularly, felt like there was a big flurry of that. But there are advantages to working in the UK for financial reasons.
I think that also just the landscape is shifting, and it's always little waves, but it feels like there's quite an excitement around the UK musical theatre industry at the moment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is really great, like with Mincemeat opening on Broadway and things like that. It feels like some people are excited about creating and possibilities, and that's really exciting to be part of. So I hope that continues.
Absolutely. Oh, wonderful.
But it's such a long lead time. That's the thing. Like, you start working on a show now, and you're looking at 7 years in the future, and that's the scary thing. It's not quick.
So I suppose it really lends itself to the question of what are you working on now? What is coming? What is going to happen for Jen and Caroline, or Caroline and Jen, however you put it? What is next for you? What are you looking to bring out?
Lots of things. So in the immediate, we've always got lots of things going, because again, it's like planting acorns.
Yeah,
You've got to plant lots of acorns, and some of them will grow and some of them won't. But you love all the acorns that you plant. One of our acorns is that we've got an audio adaptation of Errol's Garden coming out, which is really exciting because it's a new area for us as well. So this is actually a podcast version of Errol's Garden. So it's an adaptation of the stage adaptation, but it was really, really fun and interesting working specifically for an audio-only environment. I reckon Caroline can talk a bit more to that.
Excuse me.
Well, in theater, we have this expression, you have to show it, don't tell.
Yeah.
And when you can't show,
because no one can see anything,
but you don't want to tell it to the audience in a way that they feel like they're being narrated at. So you working in visual description into the scenes, that was a new thing for us, and took us a few tries to really understand how much visual, and also just using things like sound effects to kind of link things together, whereas maybe on stage it would be a prop, but you don't have that prop. And so that was I
suppose the world of your background in composition should come into play there, though, right?
So yeah, definitely. And it's really exciting working in a connected but slightly off tangent medium as well. It makes you think about everything. It's like the composition orchestration side. It makes working in one area makes you think about the other areas as well, and it all interlinks. So that's one thing that we've got going. Errol's Garden is coming out in summer as an audio adaptation.
Amazing.
So that will be really exciting.
Go get it now. Just quickly on that, obviously you mentioned about sort of how it makes you think differently. Is there anything that you've learned from doing the audio only that you can see yourself taking into your next visual musical?
Well, we are interested in writing for audiences with different kinds of disabilities. So a lot of our children's work will have elements of sign language already in it. And we have slowly been developing ideas of how we can add touches of visual description, maybe for sight-impaired audiences. And that is... and
I'd say not just for them, but it's really... Kids like getting the same information in different ways.
Well, I was about to say,
it's... I feel like the more if everything becomes more cohesive on stage, that's great for everybody.
Absolutely,
and then if you don't have one of those senses, even better, because you've got, you can choose some of the others as well. So yeah, that's really interesting. That's really made us think about that.
Yeah.
And also, that's such a beautiful thing, isn't it? So, as you say, when you're really focusing on a young audience, to be able to actually go out to them all and be like, okay, you are hard of hearing or you're visually impaired or something like that, and still having that angle to be able to aid them and help them so they feel included. That's such a beautiful lovely ladies. Thank
you.
That's very nice.
Oh, I was just going to say we've got some other things in development as well. So we've always got lots of different shows at various different stages. So we've got some workshops for a new show coming up, which would be really exciting to get back. It's really nice having different projects at different stages.
I suppose it keeps it a bit diverse for you as well, right? Because you're not just doing the same thing day in, day out. You've got that sort of kind of...
different things going on different cycles. At the same time, we've obviously both got our individual work outside of the writing partnership as well that keeps going too. And
Well, I suppose that's actually a very good question we to discuss there. What's next for you both? Or certainly what you're working on. What's next for you individually? What's going on with you personally?
I'm working on a...
One at a time, ladies, one at a time.
Under embargo.
Oh, no. So I'm working on a... Does this count? Because it's sort of with Caroline, but not officially within our writing partnership. I'm working on a really big orchestral piece that's narrated, but still for young audiences.
Wonderful.
So a different kind of medium. So not theatre, but with a big orchestra, because I love a big orchestra. I've got a couple of things that I sadly can't mention, but yes, watch this space. If they happen, they'll be very exciting. Sorry.
Won't tell us our favourites, won't tell us what you do next. I'm joking. No, I'm only joking. How about you, Caroline? What's next for you?
So I'll carry on with the work I'm already doing. The community work that I already do, and then I'm working on a small project, it's a storytelling, an interactive storytelling event through Sutton Council called The Queen's Bee. And it's a very cute little show about the lady who was kind of in charge of the lavender fields in the South London area in the 1800s. And she was the purveyor of lavender to the Queen. And it is not a musical. It's just a little storytelling event. So that's an example of just a small project that I might do on my own.
I wonder, your careers and your days are so diverse. It's wonderful. You've got a lot going on.
Yeah, it's really hard to keep track of it sometimes.
Well, unless there's anything else that you want to talk about today, and I know you've brought your list of stuff with you as well, Jen. Is there anything you want to cover? Anything you think we've missed? Please take this as the opportunity to plug, tell, whatever you want. Otherwise, I have one question for you both left.
Okay.
So the question I've asked all of my guests, and I suppose you can answer individually, but also collaboratively and collectively as well, is in 100 years' time, people look back and they're like Caroline Wigmore, Jennifer Green, or the duo. What do you want your legacy to be? When they think of your name, what do you want to be remembered for?
So I'm just going to steal someone else's completely because Mr. Sondheim put it far better than anyone else will ever be able to. Children and art. That's all you can leave as a legacy.
Fair play.
I can't beat that.
So you've got your children,
got children, got art.
So
done.
Just quit now, just done. No more to bring to the table. I love it. No, that's wonderful though, right? Oh, beautiful. How about yourself, Caroline?
I couldn't say it better.
Yeah. Would love to claim that, but completely Mr. Sondheim.
I love it. Well, look, ladies, thank you so much for coming on. I wish you the absolute very best. I've got no hesitation. One of them Olivia Awards will be yours one day. And I'll tell you what, when it happens, you can come back on. You can tell us all about it. Actually, I'll tell you what. Sorry, I will go take one 1 second.
Yeah.
For anyone that's watching, one piece of advice from you each for someone breaking out, wanting to write their own musicals, regardless of whether it's for children or for adults, piece of advice you would leave them as to, right, this is the main thing to think about, certainly from your perspective anyway.
Yeah, I think for young people who are interested in theater, sometimes they know they belong in theater, but they're trying to find which area they belong in. And if you're interested in writing, I would say only write if you feel you can't do anything else.
Okay.
And I don't mean that as a negative. I just mean because it takes so much dedication, consistency, and sometimes you just have to deal with a lot of setbacks, a lot of low pay, a lot of struggle. It's also amazing and joyful and wonderful. But I think if we write because we can't not write, I don't know what's wrong with us.
Really annoying, isn't it?
No, I get that. Right. It's your calling, it's your passion.
It's like an addiction.
Yeah.
You just have to keep coming back to it.
Yeah. As soon as you close one show, you're like, okay, what are we doing now?
The thing that I wish I had realised about a decade earlier than I did is that nobody ever gives you permission to do anything.
Okay.
So you just have to do it.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Ask for forgiveness. It's easier to get permission, right?
And people expect you to do stuff. I think that maybe as children, maybe as young girls, although I hope that that's changing, we're very much taught to, kind of wait your turn, stand in line.
Yeah.
Wait, someone will ask when they're ready for you, and that doesn't happen at all. I don't think it happens anywhere in any walk of life.
Yeah.
So you don't get permission to do anything. You just have to go do it.
People that stand out are people that just do things, right? Yeah. Wonderful. Anything else you want to add? No? All good.
Thank you so much for
Thank
having
you
us.
so much for having us.
It.
It's been a lovely
Caroline,
time.
Thank you so much. Jennifer, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you for having us.
And that's it for this episode of Beats Learning. Huge thanks to Caroline and Jennifer for sharing their journey, creative insight, and some seriously valuable lessons for anyone looking to write, collaborate, or break into theatre. If you enjoyed the conversation, hit like, subscribe, and pass it on to someone who'd love it too, especially if they're into musical theatre or storytelling through song. Well, thanks for tuning in. I'm Ben Davenport, and I'll see you next time on Beats Learning.